Hey there, everybody. In this video, we are going to continue on with samples and surveys. Again, this one's going to be wow. You can tell it's already been a long day. It's going to be pretty vocab heavy. All right, so not a whole lot of calculations. In fact, I don't think there's any calculations happening. I don't even think there's numbers that are going to show up today, aside from the 8 and the 11 right there. So very vocab heavy. So make sure that you understand what each one of these vocab terms is referencing. Yesterday, and by yesterday I mean the previous video, we talked about how to take samples, how to select people from the overall population. Today we're going to say, how can we survey them? How can we perform a study? How can we get data from that sample? So yesterday's how do we select the people? Today's how do we ask questions, or how do we get information? So the way that you collect information is to perform what's called a study. So survey, study, simple. If it's poorly designed, you're going to get unreliable statistics. So anytime you have results kind of given to you, you should always be looking at the study's methods before you kind of trust that to make conclusions about the population. All right, so always look at how the study was conducted before you trust the results. Think of anytime the NEQA newspaper comes out, sometimes they have the student survey responses, and there's like a little pie chart. Those shouldn't necessarily be trusted because that was kind of a volunteer response. And when you do that, you're probably not going to have everyone involved. So that's just a quick example. All right, I digress. So different ways to collect information. First is an observational study. So this is, I kind of nicknamed this one the creeper, right? So you're observing people. You're just watching people that in such a way that you are not affecting the study. So you're not doing anything. You're not intervening. You are just sitting back with a clipboard, watching people, taking notes. You cannot determine if there's been a causal relationship, if one thing causes another, by doing an observational study. Next is a controlled experiment. So a controlled experiment is when you have two different groups. You have a control group and experimental group. You're going to give the experimental group some sort of treatment. Maybe it's an advantage of some sort, maybe it's a disadvantage. The control group gets nothing. Sometimes if this is medication related, they'll give the control group what's called a placebo, which is kind of like a fake medicine, and the experimental group gets the actual medicine. And then you're going to compare the effects from one group to the other. This one you can determine if one thing causes the other in the controlled experiment, as long as the experiment was well designed. They did this way back in the day when they were trying to prove that cigarettes cause lung cancer, because obviously the tobacco companies didn't want that data to come out. So they had done lab studies on rats where they had a control group and an experimental group, and they would basically give rats cancer through means of cigarette tar. But that's what they had to do in order to prove there was a causal relationship. All right, that's a little gloomy, huh? Next up is survey, and that's just you going around asking people by giving them a survey. So give them a set of questions. Google form is a perfect example of this. Now, when you're analyzing study methods, if you want to figure out, is it trustworthy, is it valid, you want to figure out, was the sample, the people, was that randomly chosen so that it can accurately represent the population? Is the sample an appropriate size? If I've got a population of 5,000 people, I can't just choose 3 people and say that that's an accurate size, because that would provide way too much room for error. Is the sample representative of the population? So again, I don't want to over or underrepresent any subgroups within the population. So if I'm interviewing NEQA students, I don't want to go over to the freshman campus and interview everybody during their math class, because that's only going to be freshmen. And then lastly, was there bias in the way that the collection or the data was collected? So is there an unfair leaning one way or the other with how we collected this? So here's an example. We want to figure out which type of study method would be the best to test the effectiveness of a new pain medicine for migraines. So which one of these 3 would probably be the best and why? Well, this one's probably pretty straightforward. An experiment would probably be the best one. So you give this new drug to one group, and then you give a placebo or a fake medicine, maybe it's like a Tic Tac, to a control group, and then see if there is any effectiveness. See if the new medication recipients overwhelmingly say that they felt better. Next, which type of study method is described, and should we be able to trust these to make general conclusions about the population? All right, so first one, researchers randomly chose two groups from 10 volunteers. Over a period of 8 weeks, one group eats ice cream before going to sleep, the other one does not. Well, if there's only 10 volunteers, I'm already kind of leery of this, right? Because they volunteered to do it and there's only 10 of them, so that's kind of fishy. The volunteers wear monitoring devices while sleeping, and the researchers record dream activity. So we're trying to see, does ice cream help before going to sleep? So let's see, what method would this be? That would be a controlled experiment. One group is getting some sort of treatment, the other one is not. But we have such a small sample that this is probably pretty unreliable. If we wanted to make that broad of a conclusion, we'd certainly need more than 10 people. Students in a science class record the height of bean plants as they grow. What type of a study would this be? Observational, controlled, or survey? Are we watching the beans? Do we have two different groups of beans? Or are we asking the beans questions? It's kind of an interesting visual. Well, this would be an observational. We're just kind of sitting back and watching. We're not doing anything to intervene. And this could probably give us a good conclusion about the growth rate of bean plant, but we do have to keep a watchful eye that there might be some other factors that we're not taking into account that could really have an effect. So what type of soil are we using? Where is the plant? Is it getting enough sunlight? Is it not getting enough sunlight? How frequently was it watered? Basically, all these other things that could affect growth rate. Student council members ask every 10th student in the lunch line if they like cafeteria food. Well, if they're in the lunch line, I would assume so, but hey, maybe that's just me. So this would be a survey. They're going around, they're asking questions, and no, this wouldn't be reliable because if, kind of like I just said, if they're waiting in line, they're probably more likely to enjoy the cafeteria food. But if you have people who always bring food from home, maybe they don't like cafeteria food. Last one, a list of students is randomly generated from the school database. Database? Information for every student is entered into the whatever database, and each student has an equally likely chance of being selected. Fun. Students selected are asked how much time they spend on household chores each week. So we're asking people questions here. Why can I not hit the correct button? So we're asking people questions. So this would be a survey. And yeah, this is probably trustworthy to make a conclusion about the population because it was completely random. There's no over or underrepresentation by nature of sampling these students. So, and there's no really bias in the question itself. So yeah, I would say that this is pretty trustworthy. All right, home stretch here. A pharmaceutical company asks for volunteers to test a new drug for high blood pressure. Half of them will be given the new drug, half of them will be given a placebo, so a fake medication or a sugar pill or a Tic Tac. Not TikTok, Tic Tac, little tiny breath mints. The researcher will monitor the blood pressure of each volunteer. So what sampling method? So this is, sampling is how are people chosen? Let's see, we asked for volunteers. Oof, not too good. So that would be self-selected if they're volunteering. Which study method did we do? Observational, experimental, survey. Well, since we're giving half the people medication, the other half placebos, this would be an experiment. We have an experimental group and a control group. Could we make a conclusion about the effectiveness in the larger population? Yay or nay? Well, this one's kind of up in the air, right? Because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we have to keep in mind. Were they selected at random for the people who volunteered? Are they all in a certain age range, or was it all spread out? Was one gender overrepresented or underrepresented? What is the overall health of these people? So there are some other factors that we'd have to be aware of before we could trust these conclusions. All right, that wraps up day 11, which also wraps up Unit 8. Stay tuned with regard to some sort of an assessment. The Alg 2 trig stats teachers and we still need to figure out if and how we're going to do that. And you know the drill. If at any point you guys have questions, please let me know. Good luck, have fun, be safe, roll tide.